Before we dive into this video, I want to note that a lot of care providers use the term TOLAC, or trial of labor after cesarean, to refer to a planned VBAC labor while it's happening. So essentially, TOLAC is the labor and VBAC is the delivery. So like, you don't have a VBAC unless you do actually have that vaginal birth after cesarean, where a TOLAC means that you're having a trial of labor after cesarean. So you're trying to have that vaginal birth, even if it ends in another C-section. So with that out of the way, this video is a big one because, it's really essential to make sure that a woman is a good candidate for a VBAC, because if she is not, it could make it a more dangerous situation. And so while this video will give you a general idea of if you are a good candidate for a VBAC, it's still really important to discuss your particular circumstances with a VBAC supportive care provider, because obviously every woman is unique in her medical needs. And this doctor can help you determine if a VBAC is the safest option for you and your baby. And I emphasize that this conversation should take place with a care provider who is supportive of VBACs, because if they are not, they might try to talk you out of having a VBAC, even if you're a great candidate for one. So first, try to find that VBAC supportive care provider before you really dig into whether or not you are a good candidate. And so to help you determine if you are, one of the first things that you will want to do is get your surgical records from your C-section. And these records will tell you the type of incision and repair that was used during your C-section, why you received a C-section, and if there were any complications. And so with that said, these are the health circumstances that generally mean that somebody is good to go for a VBAC or a TOLAC, to try for that VBAC. Okay, so you're having a healthy pregnancy. That's a big one. It might be trickier to have a VBAC if you have certain health circumstances during pregnancy, like placenta previa, for example. And this is something that your care provider can help you determine if there's any special circumstances that might make that VBAC dangerous. You want to wait at least 18 months between, your C-sections, as you want to give the C-section incisions plenty of time to heal. So 18 months minimum. You haven't had more than 2 previous C-sections. You've never had a uterine rupture. So it's really crucial that you've never had a uterine rupture, which is a spontaneous tearing of the uterine muscles, as this could significantly increase your chances of having a uterine rupture during birth, which is dangerous. You haven't had any other uterine surgeries. For example, you haven't had any surgery to remove fibroids. Your baby is head down. If you're trying for a VBAC, it is really, really important that the baby be head down. If they're in the transverse position or breech, it could be a lot trickier to have that VBAC. Okay, now this is the big one. You had a low transverse incision for your C-section. So this type of incision, it involves a horizontal cut in the lower, thinner part of the uterus. And this part of the uterus, it doesn't contract as strongly as the rest of the uterus during childbirth, so it has a lower chance of rupturing. So that's a really big reason why that low transverse incision is ideal if you're trying for a VBAC. And luckily, this type of incision, it is the most common these days, especially if the C-section wasn't an emergency. In some cases, if it was an emergency C-section, the woman might have gotten a vertical incision, because it can often be the fastest way to get to the baby. And this type of incision, it goes from the navel down to the pubic bone. If you had a vertical incision, the doctor might recommend that you don't try for a VBAC. But again, this is something important to discuss with your medical care provider. And so, in addition, there was a study published in BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth, the journal, that found that women had a higher chance of a successful VBAC if they have had a previous vaginal birth. So, say, for example, your first baby was born vaginally, then you had a C-section after that, and now you're trying for a VBAC. You have a higher chance of having a successful VBAC if you've already had that vaginal birth. And you have a higher chance of having a successful VBAC if the reason for your C-section was fetal malpresentation, which essentially means likely that your baby was breech, and that's the reason why you had your C-section. And the same study also found that the following factors were associated with a lower chance of having a VBAC. So advanced age, obesity, diabetes, hypertensive disorders, labor induction. If your labor is induced, that can lower your chances of having a successful VBAC. Or a previous C-section that occurred because induction did not work. So say you were induced, it just didn't work, or the baby had shoulder dystocia. So those are some reasons that would lower the chance of having a successful VBAC. And so if you meet, all the criteria that I listed before, for you, a VBAC is likely a safer option than a repeat C-section. But again, definitely discuss it with that VBAC supportive care provider.